welcome to, well, the comment response video. And the comment response video, well, based on what was last week's most hot button, or rather commented on video, is the Battle of Coronel. Now, today of course is Thursday, the 10th of November. Tomorrow is the 11th of November, which is a very special day. But today is the 10th. And hopefully, by the time I'm actually doing a live, my poppy, which I've ordered, will have arrived. Because I haven't been where I normally go to get a poppy. And yes, I do wear one every year. And no, I don't agree with the idea that it's glorifying war, because if you're wearing something which is quite literally a symbol of what grows in fields after all the people have, well, after all the humans who've died have fertilized the soil with their blood, I don't think that can really be a symbol of a glorifying war. Anyone who doesn't seem to really, in my mind, cannot really understand the implications of saying that glorifies war. But let's leave that to one side. It's the Battle of Coronel. And also I will add at the end, if anyone is watching these videos with an idea to inviting me to conferences or those sort of things, there'll be a little discussion of how to go about it. Because usually I apply to conferences, and that's something I quite enjoy doing, and going and speaking at conferences when they're available and when I feel I have a paper which is worthy of them and I have time. But lately I've been getting some very interesting emails about conferences, and I think I should probably make a few pointers at the end. So, the Battle of Coronel. Let's start off with a question from Roy Clifton. To be fair, the Germans didn't have to deal with the Kamchatka in their East Asia Squadron. No. That does help. Having Tsingtao meant they didn't have to deal with the Kamchatka. Matthew Goebel, I throw a pair of binoculars into the sea at the mention of that name. This rate, the sea is going to end up being full of binoculars. Orion Taylor, I still like the idea that you could track exactly where the fleet went by following a trio of now very rusty binoculars on the seabed from the Atlantic to Indian Ocean round the Cape of Good Hope. I'm actually now thinking, it depends what happened to the lenses, but if the lenses survive, they could outlast, theoretically, the rust in the water. Because metal rusts and oxidizes, but glass doesn't tend to. It'd be very discolored, probably have growths on them, but yeah, it could be more. You might be tracking it by lenses now more than rusty binoculars. I'm not sure. It is about 117 years. Vision, question just popped into my my head while listening to this in the hotel laundry. Cool. What if after the Battle of Coronel, the East Germany Asia Squadron sailed to Chile or United States for internment, shipping the sailors home on neutral ships while preserving the vessels or even selling them, like their battlecruiser they sold to Turkey? Well, here's an interesting question. Would they make it home on neutral ships? In World War II, the Iron Wrist war with Japan by engaging Asamaro. In World War I, they did some very similar sketchy things with ships which were German flag, Swedish flag, not German flag, American flagged, and other nations. So, my view is it's doubtful any power would be willing to help them. Paul from Chicago, my comment was dumb, so removed it. How am I supposed to respond if you remove it? I wouldn't have called it dumb. Vision, I thought of that. Suppose they could try Italian, not yet in war, or American ships. I'm sure we had some. Given would the British want to risk war of either of them on the wrong side? To be fair, the thing is, the Americans and the Italians both know the British policy on blockade. There have been wars already over the British policy on blockade. They know it full-throatedly. And do they want to get involved in the war? That's the thing. You're asking if they want to help. And they both want to be neutral at this point. They're trying to be neutral. So... yeah, I don't think either would really want those people are turning up on their ships. There'd be quietly found means of not having that happen. They could go in small groups, forcing the British to stop and board American and Italian ships multiple times in the Atlantic Mediterranean. Yes, but again, you're presuming the government actually allow them to go. And they probably wouldn't. If you're interning people, your ships, you intern their crew as well. You know, that's the thing. If they're interned, they're interned. You're not just interning the ships, your crew are interned as well. You don't get them, they don't get to go home, they are also imprisoned. It's not a case of, oh, the ship's now neutral, but the crew are free to go. No, they are interned as well. So weekly SM Marios and RMS Trents. Like the Southern Confederacy, they might disperse crew across America to secretly acquire merchant vessels like the SMS Seedler to go raiding. Again, they have to get out of the camps they'll be interned in. And if they do, then that's going to be a problem. Now, I do realise that actually I am talking about this and there is someone who managed to make it home. But he's special. I'm of course talking about Wilhelm Canaris, who does manage to make it home. But he makes it home solo. And that's the important point. He makes it home solo. You know, he is aboard Dresden. Most of the crew intern in Chile, and they therefore are imprisoned in Chile. Canaris is fluent in Spanish, which most of the crew are not, so he's able to escape. There he finds some German merchants, and he's able to return to Germany, travelling solo, pretending to be Chilean. You know, pretending to be from South America, using his knowledge of Spanish. He does it alone, he does it without any help from any of the government authorities, and it's an amazing feat, but it's a feat which is not really replicable by others. Given Mussolini knows the odds against him after his great victory, it might be best to just bag the victory and exit the war. If the crew can't get home, there is the German community in Chile and other South American nations, and ships can be sold or gifted to Chile and other South American nations. Germans can be hired as technical advisors. Hiring them as technical advisors would cause problems. Turkey does it, but Turkey ends up in the war, doesn't it? That's why Turkey is really not a good example of what to do, because that's part of the reasons why Turkey ends up getting invaded, because they don't act neutral. And whereas you consider Switzerland, which does the armed neutrality to the level of even their fighter aircraft engaging Allied bombers when they tried to cross Switzerland. No, this is the point. You either have neutrality, as in like Spain, like Switzerland. You then, which is sort of armed and very vocal. You have neutrality, which is going to be so inclined to one side you end up falling into the war on that side. Or your neutrality where you've got distance and you keep yourself as distant as you can. That is how neutrality can actually work in a world war. One of those three routes, that's your options. Overall, live German ships under Germans and ships under new colours, but still afloat, are more used than dead Germans and sunken ships. Yep, not for the sake of honour. The other option is to steam to Germany while avoiding all contact with other ships. The Falkland Islands was a big mistake. It should have seemed too risky for the meagre reward of shelling a small town. True. I think avoiding the Falkland Islands would have been a more sensible option. I don't know how far they get. And I think the reason they're not avoiding the Falkland Islands is von Spee overplays his hand. He's trying to rack up as much glory as possible before he ultimately gets destroyed. He doesn't think he's going to get home. So therefore, you are going for the bonus prize. Happy Wyvern. Thank you, Dr. Lark. I was actually going to ask you if you've done a video on this battle before in your next live session I could catch. Well, there is actually going to be a live on this one in January. The only reason it's in January is because, well, it's a long time. There's many options to go now. I will say, Jeff Beeler, you're... Oh, that makes more sense. I'm not sure what they were doing, YouTube was doing with your comment, but it was very small. Phil Bannon, so why didn't they go to attack Vancouver and then go to Seattle and say, okay, we will be interned? A, it's range, it's a long way to get to Vancouver. B, it's well, it's going to be stormy whichever way they go. But let's put it this way, there's no way of getting out if you go to Vancouver. You actually do have a chance of getting home, and I think Von Spey is trying to get home. I don't think he rates his chance of getting home very highly, but I think he's trying to get home. I know. Stabilized camera is on the order list. It's on the order list. Paychecks arrive at the end of November. It'll be here, and hopefully it'll stop being case that every time I giggle or move my toes, the camera shakes and wiggles. And I don't know why it does, because the screen it's balanced on doesn't shake and wiggle. I'm also considering getting a new sort of screen stand that can mount them a bit more properly, but we'll leave that to one side. And also there's the relationship with the US is not so great. Remember again, the US and Germany have actually been close to war at certain points. In fact, there have been British intelligence estimates which have put the likelihood of war between Germany and the US as far higher than war between even Russia and Japan at points. I've talked about this. There was another video which isn't probably going to get a common response because it just hasn't enough videos. Not enough comments in the Mets, we're going to sound strange, where I mentioned the whole scenario with Venezuela. And there are a number of people going, well, you know, did Britain want to risk war with America? Britain, as I tried to explain in that video, if Germany attacked American ships, then Britain would have stopped Germany. However, if the Americans had ended up attacking German ships, which was quite possible, because they were both considered quite hot-headed under certain circumstances by the British, I can't imagine why, then the British would have taken the lead in fighting the Americans. Because they couldn't afford Germany to put itself at the head of a global coalition to fight America on the high seas and do whatever it needed to do. They couldn't afford that to happen. There is a problem when you're when you're the best. You always have to be the best. There is the problem when you're the first amongst equals. You always have to be the first. I.e., when you are the leader, you do not get to step down. Being a leader is not about your title. Being a leader is a role. You either are one or you aren't. And if you're a leader, that means you need to take the lead and actually organize things. Because if you're not a leader, you're going to be following. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with following. Especially amongst people when you're in groups. There's always a policy I've always adopted of letting the person who knows the most take the lead in any scenario. It makes sense. If they know more, let them take the lead. Chip in my 2 pennyworth, but let them take the lead. It's sensible. Because not everyone knows everything about everything, and anyone who claims they know everything about everything at all times are frankly an ego who you want to keep as far away from any leadership position as physically possible. But with countries it's different. If you are, okay, let's be honest, the British are the closest to what we would consider a superpower in terms of status in the 1890s, early 1900s of any nation in the world. They can't afford, like America can't afford today, for them to be seen to be taking a back seat and letting others lead. Especially not if those others are the people contending for their position or challenging their position. Because it's a good way to lose your position. It's the reality. So they have no choice. They have to do it. They would also probably want, the British would also probably make sure the war was over as quickly as possible. It would probably be a very short naval war only. Unless the Americans decided to try and widen it into a land campaign and invade Canada. But if the British could keep it to a limited naval conflict where they just beat up each other's navies and then had a peace treaty and sorted it all out, that would be the British ideal. Jeff Beeler found this. In the actual log record of 23rd of July 1914, Canopus performed a full power trial at Talon Bay, where they measured mile markers at towers 6,080 feet apart. The ship reaches full power and is timed between the markers. Canopus performed those full power tests and records about six different speeds. One is difficult to read and could be 13.5 knots or 18.5 knots. Oh, I'm so doubtful of the 18.5 knots. The others are 15 knots, 16.5 knots, 16.8 knots, 17.2 and 17.8 knots. Now, it is important to remember that the speeds are calculated based on a mechanical stopwatch, and a sight at a time the ship passes one marked tower and the other. It does not take into account tides, winds or anything else. In the log record for that time onward, even the South American operation around Coronel and the Falklands, the ship never attains more than 12 knots. Captain Grant, in his book about his exploits as captain of the Canopus, states that the ship could do 15 knots briefly, but only 12 knots for an extended period of time. This is consistent with Craddock's view. Churchill stated in his message that the ship could do 15.2 knots, and he is correct, but only for a brief time. Battle of Coronel occurred on the 1st of November 1914. The log record for that shows the fastest speed on that date was 15 knots or 93 revolutions. On the day before and after, she never attains greater than 13 knots. Here's a link to the Royal Navy logbooks. Thank you. I have read those. No mention of falsifications by Chief Engineer S.P. Start. No, there are so many things covered up about that story. It's an interesting thing, but Canopus was, fun. Martin Peacock. Hello, Martin. That was magnificent. You have just perfectly articulated my thoughts and feelings on the whole Coronel fiasco perfectly, in a way I never could. Thank you, Des, really. That was incredible. I could not say enough good things about this video. Thank you. I've only felt that hubris on the part of the RN was also a part of play in the best battle, at least from parts of the RN. Firm belief in the superiority of the RN is the descendants of Nelson or some such meant that they expected things to work out for them. It was only when Fisher returned that the hubris mostly was removed. There is to an extent hubris, but there's also, I would say, just as much an expectation that they have to do it because they're descendants of Nelson. It's going to sound strange. There is a difference between hubris and self-expectation. They expect themselves to stand up and fight. They do not expect themselves to withdraw. They do not expect themselves to retreat. They have to engage. It's what they expect of themselves. It's not a hubris that they will automatically win. It's a hubris, it's an expectation that they must engage. It's quite damaging in some regards. In other regards, it is key to how the British in both World Wars end up achieving, to an extent, a moral ascendancy over some of their opponents. Because they know they will engage. Regardless of what happens, regardless of the odds, the British will engage. It's quite scary when you realise you're facing someone who's that level of maniac. In the perspective of the people who actually go, I'm going to lose this battle. I'm not going to engage. Then you're sort of looking at the other and going, you're in a single little destroyer against me. Why are you not trying to dodge away? Why are you charging towards me? AKA watching HMS Glowworm. Or tribal destroyers, just HMS Esco, charging round the fjord, getting her, firing her guns, getting her bow blown off, and then advancing sternwards towards the enemy. There is no real sane reason for doing that. There is no... You can perfectly justify we lost our bow, so we withdrew. That's perfectly justifiable. No one is going to critique you for doing that. But no, they go on. Glowworm, a single destroyer versus a heavy cruiser and escorts. There is no reason. If it had withdrawn behind smoke after firing off some torpedoes, it would have been perfectly fine. But no, it charges because that's what they expect of themselves. I've often thought an interesting what if is replacing Churchill as First Lord with Fisher when Kitchener becomes Secretary of State of War. The idea being you have two senior military men in the cabinet and advisors of the government. That would have been very fun. It could have been interesting. Not necessarily the best, because let's be honest, Fisher also has his own wackadoodle plans. As for the question of what Craddock should have done, I'm not sure what else he could really have done given the situation he was in. In a way, he was doomed no matter what. He either dies fighting a superior force or risks a court-martial and disgrace. My only thought would be to send Adrian to Otranto away as soon as possible, and then try and keep the East Asia Squadron at arm's reach until nightfall, then retire. Use the speed advantage and send Glasgow ahead to call for aid. If he could keep the East Asia Squadron under observation, he has the chance to destroy it with reinforcements, but that is a big gamble. The chance of losing the Germans at night or in rough seas is very high. I've never envied Craddock or the men who served under him for that situation they are put in. Sensible. HMS Canopus was also at the Battle of Falklands and fired the first shots. Canopus fired 2 salvos, both of which fell short. She did. What's she going? I'm not even halfway through this yet, but I think this is the sort of topic you could have had 3 or 4 lectures on, given its reality, the culmination of pre-1914 cruiser warfare. Exactly. Lions, I know this might be on my end, but I thought I'd make you aware that I only seem to watch this video in 360p. I have no idea what's happening on this, okay? But it seems to me that every time I'm working with YouTube, it takes different amounts of times for the HD to be actually processed. And I can load it. And if I give you an example, I loaded up one on Tuesday's video this week in the afternoon because I re-recorded it because I wanted to change what I was saying. And I thought, that'll never get through. And it was HD and SD ready by the time it went live at 7:30, I think. And I'm just sort of going, how is that possible? How? Whereas the Battle of Coronel, I uploaded on the Saturday morning. It was processing. SD had finished processing by Saturday evening. And HD was processing. Still processing. Goes live on Tuesday after having flashed that HD was processed, but actually wasn't processed apparently. And then we have what we had happen. So, yeah. I have no idea. Flasher 2 Vachel. Hello. Right. An excellent summary of the battles. You're the first person for a long time to come to the same conclusion myself for the most part. I've been catching up with your videos while I've not been able to make live streams, and you continue to do a good job bringing this information to new people. Thank you. What would I have done as Craddock? Prayed to get clear instructions of reality, and then probably divided my forces. With Otranto patrolling the Falkland and South Georgia gaps with orders to radio distress if any enemy vessel is encountered with the run like Billio for the Falklands. Glasgow and Monmouth Good Hope to patrol between the Falklands and Cape Horn, hoping for defence to reinforce them with a plan to fight a close action in the almost inevitable bad weather near Cape Horn in order to expend the limited ammunition the German squadron can be carrying. Canovas to protect Fort Stanley, with the coal supply and radio being essential to not fall into German hands. What would I do as Fisher? Far sturdy for his disposition areas, weak area everywhere, strong nowhere, and send a message to all forces at sea to make sure they respond to all messages directly from me. Lima said that if I send something such as the First Lord of the Admiralty would like you to, I actually ignored and hope they get what I mean, whilst asking Churchill to refrain from sending direct orders to anyone. What would I do as Von Spey? Listen to Captain Mirka of Gneisenau and skirt past the Falklands as far and as fast as possible, then trying to pass through the Falklands South Georgia Gap and possibly head for the African coast, hoping to find some supply of German Southwest Africa? Yeah. That sounds sensible to me. There's not much chance, though. There's not much chance because there's more squadrons, and the longer you leave, how do I put this? The longer you leave it, the more time Fisher has a chance to rework things. And Fisher will rework things. And Freeman, great video. Thank you. Really good insights into strategic and operational areas on both sides. What would I do if I was Craddock? I would say that my force of 2 armoured cruisers, 1 modern light cruiser and 1 auxiliary cruiser, might work as a reconnaissance force, but not appropriate to engage German squadron if they are operating as a unit. Also, what if Von Spey runs around the South Pacific? He can use up his coal reserves, then either come around the Cape, where I'll be watching, ready to fall back in the Falklands for fuel support, or go somewhere else, and hopefully somewhere else will be where HMAS Australia is willing to say good day with 12-inch gun and schlumps of love. How do I get around Churchill problem? Either I have redefined my force, role, act, or I will comfort myself in my premature retirement that I'm not having to write or having cause to write 1,660 letters to bereaved relatives. Yeah, the trouble is, the thing is, it's not just Craddock you have to think about. It's all the captains, it's all the officers, it's all the NCOs, it's all the crew. It's all of their self-images. And yes, whilst there'll be a few who might well agree with you, the vast majority of their self-images will be something along the lines of, we are Royal Navy. We do not run from the enemy, we run towards the enemy. It's kind of like dealing with firemen. Look, I've often had this discussion with people. I have utmost respect for firemen and women. They are wonderful people, but they run into a burning building. Now, there are many things I can imagine and imagine myself doing. Running into a burning building, if I'm sure there's someone inside who needs help, probably. My own mental self-image and ego would mean I would be going in. Because if there's no one else there, if there's no police or firemen or anyone else there, I'm a fairly big person, I'm fairly strong, I'm fairly fit. I can go and grab someone and pull them out. I do a lot of stuff in the gym, I can lift heavy weights, and I've got to do leg day for a legitimate reason in that case. But if I was unsure if there was anyone in there, and it was just a maybe there's someone in there, I wouldn't be touching that burning building with a 10-foot barge pole. Okay? Wouldn't go anywhere near it. But fire people go in straight away into it. And it's so with the Navy, it's the same. It's a case of, they're our enemy over there, we're going to go and engage them. It might not be the most sensible thing to do, that's what they do. Calvin goes, how Craddock could have fared better? When you are a Jim Haddar, Chief O'Brien cannot send you into battle. Never that. I do get the Star Trek reference, but I would also say I would never doubt Chief O'Brien's ability to send anyone into battle, so you might think he can't send in Jim Haddar, but you really want to be sure? Lions, if I was in their place, I would have had the town class cruisers do the best shadow the German force was calling for whilst calling for reinforcements. Sounds so small. But from Chicago, defense could have taken Von Spey by herself. And I'm not sure. And Craddock was sent a worn-out, ancient, strategically worthless battleship. Even if Canopus had been in perfect going order, she still would have not been brought Von Spey to battle. Good job, Churchill. Craddock engages because it is duty to engage and because it's his orders to engage. The real shame is the incompetent Asquith left Churchill in which lets Gallipoli happen and then Russia fall. We've been over this before. Actually, the thing is, Gallipoli makes sense strategically. It's its execution. As I always said, it's not the plan that's it is to extent the plan. It's not the idea that's the problem. It's the execution of the idea. It's atrocious execution. And the trouble is, all the people who had the idea left the execution to other people who didn't know what the idea was. If you're going to make a massive strategic gamble, make a frigging gamble. Don't do it half measures. Grissa, read of people crying about you not saying how mean and bad terrible war is. When I say, why bother? There's no point trying to explain the reality of war to civilians. They'll never get it from a conversation or a book. And no matter what they say, they don't really want to really know what is actually being done and buying two 18-year-old kids in their name. They prefer convenient fiction for the sake of their conscience. That's not a measure I haven't heard before. And to an extent, I would agree. There's always a body which are like that. But the vast majority do. And the role of historians especially is to try and explain the realities of war. Now sometimes that means I'm going to leave things unsaid because I don't think I need to explain them. I think this is comment to my this is a broad response to my comment about the fact that, well, some people have, I've been reading some ex-interviews and some people are unhappy with me not mentioning how terrible it is to blow up a planet. I'd have thought these facts were self-explanatory. Blowing up a planet is not a good thing. Let's be honest, the most powerful and, how do I put it, when you start looking at the most casualty-inducing weapons in warfare are artillery and machine guns. Now, you can be very precise with where you aim your artillery, but that explosive, when it goes off and the shrapnel goes everywhere, you have no control where that goes. It creates basically a beaten area, and anything in that area is going down. Now, that's not good. That doesn't need to be said it's not good. It's not good. But it's necessary. It's the same with machine guns. You start off hosing with one of those things, you're going to create a lot of casualties. The thing is, though, there's going to be a lot of rounds going through the air, and if you don't work out where you're sending them up, and especially if you're in a muddled fight, those casualties can be both ways. But the thing is, that's kind of all fairly self-explanatory and common sense to me. The trouble is, I spent my life in this world. Whether I'm working with current forces, modern day forces, or whether I am studying, talking, researching with veterans or forces which no longer have any living people to represent them. This is my day. This is what I deal with. So yes, I can get quite matter of fact because to me it's what I deal with. The thing you have to watch with a historian is you can become almost inured to what you are talking about. I do watch that. But I also think, to me, this is going to sound strange, if every time I talk about, in science fiction, if I talk about sort of the realities of blowing up planets, etc., if every time, and millions and billions of people die, it's kind of labouring the point. It's kind of sort of almost milking it, and that's not my style. So, I do it as best I can. I don't set out to upset people, but I do try and explain where I'm coming from. Vision, focus your dollars on the American healthcare system around. Or alternatively, come to the UK. Get British citizenship. Work for us over here. I'm sure we have many hotels who would like to employ some of your skills. We have the NHS. It's great. And it's very sensible. I got into this debate with people many times, and I try and explain the right wing. There is... you have socialised or universal healthcare is often put down as a left-wing socialist perspective, but is also a conservative perspective on it and why you support it. Because if you are sorting out a healthcare system which supports everyone and gives people good healthcare, you are going to and it's free at the point of service, it's paid for through your taxes. It means everyone has access to a same standard of healthcare, which means you have people living through childbirth and all those things. You have all the support you need for the various ailments, etc. You don't have your workforce constantly scared of getting ill. You don't have your workforce constantly worried about their family if they're ill, constantly working 2 or 3 jobs to pay for healthcare, so they're actually awake when they're doing the job which is they're best at, which is more efficient for the economy. It makes your people more productive. It also makes them happier, and happier people are always more productive. It's in the case of thing. It makes a lot of sense to have universal healthcare. It really does. And every time people turn it into a simple left-right diametric argument, I find it really annoying. Because the whole point about, if you go back to it, the root of the right wing as a thought process is they were a reaction to the left wing, and the whole point was the left wing, the liberals, when they came out, liberalism was an ideology. And the whole thing of the right was we make decisions without an ideology. So if you think about it, the original idea was that sort of one would make their decisions based on facts, and rather than being left or right, one made the decisions based on facts, and one made them based on ideology. Their decisions would be guided by the evidence. They didn't care where the solution came from. They went with the best one that fitted the data they had. And the other one was, well, we have this dream. So whilst this solution might fit better with the ideology, with the facts, we believe that this solution will work out better long term despite the data, so we'll go with this way. And that was the original point. And now, though, we have ideologies on both sides, and they spend their entire times batting each other down, and people actually going things like, well, what it has is this just hasn't been tried properly. No, it's been tried, it failed. Stop it. Stop it. Act like an adult. Sorry. Political rant over, but you know. That's all I want. Governments which just don't bother about, leave the ideology to the theorists, the people, academics, all that. But government should be about looking at the evidence and going with whatever's the best solution for that evidence, whether it's from, I don't know, titanium or diamedium. I do not care where its origin ideas of that solution are from. I care what is the best solution for the problem. Anyway, channel created to allow me to comment. Hello, channel created to allow me to comment. Final question is interesting. What would you do if you were Craddock? It can be answered from at least 2 perspectives. Speaking as someone living in the year 2022, speaking as someone in 1915 and a career officer in the Royal Navy with similar rank as Craddock. These 2 perspectives are from very different worlds. My own personal answers would be very different for those two circumstances. I agree. Which is kind of the interesting idea. Paul from Chicago. Bismarck couldn't fire back either. Didn't stop Rodney from putting a torpedo into her. That is Rodney, though. Adam Blaine. It's unfortunate, but in this situation, it could be hard for the Germans to know if Monmouth would sink or if it could be repaired. At the end, it isn't dishonourable to strike good colours when your ship has been blasted to scrap, save who you can. Colonel Elko. Yes, but there's also discretion. Bismarck was a bit of an outlier, as the entire RN was out for blood. They just lost Hood and were annoyed as hell. Von Spey's squadron had suffered scratch paint, essentially. Arguably, the ensign should have been struck, but regardless, there is only minor correlation to the events. Without Hood, I honestly expect in that condition Rodney would have offered a quarter. Even the Germans, I suspect, probably were afraid to surrender due to reprisals for Hood if they even could have signalled at that point. You can't realistically compare the situations as the sinking ship isn't the whole picture. A crime of passion and a casual murder have the same action result. The circumstances are the deciding factors. And Bellin, the sinking of Bismarck was very much a calculated thing. By that point, Rodney was putting a torp into her. The frothing bloodlust had already faded. Furthermore, Bismarck was alone, whereas Monmouth was part of a squadron, and all the ships were accounted for, and it was night time. You all have good points, but I would say this on Bismarck. I wouldn't say her sinking with a torpedo is about all that. I'd say it's also because they're running out of time and they think submarines could be joining in. They think it could end up being a trap and there could be submarines taking up position to try and sink the capital ships. So that's one of the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. Whereas von Spee doesn't have any of those issues. Yes, you can say there are other ships, but he's already fought off the other ships. And that could be an issue, but you could also go on. The thing is, they couldn't afford Bismarck getting towed home, and that's a very realistic possibility for her. Whereas for Monmouth, there's no chance of her getting home, in the condition she was in. But yeah, it's justified, it's legal, it's just not nice. It's from Christopher. It's a Kobayashi Maru type no-win scenario. There's no way the squadron commander survives with life or career and honour intact. Either you fight and die if you engage any portion of your force to allow the remaining ships to escape, you die, and historians likely condemn you for killing the crews of the ships fighting delaying action. You do not engage the enemy and you get binged, most likely metaphorically. In the end, the only thing you can salvage are the ships under your command and the lives of your men, and hope that in the future historians will look at your actions sympathetically. This leaves the last option as the optimal course: malicious compliance, Salty and company with Canopus. If her engines hold, the Germans will decline action, disengage, follow at best speed, and allow your faster cruisers to harry them as they can remain in contact with Canopus for support. Look, I tried to continue action, but the ships were fast enough to maintain contact, would have been rapidly overwhelmed if unsupported, so I was forced to discontinue the action. If her engines failed, as they were likely to, take her under tow of one of your armoured cruisers. When questioned, make some statement about feeling the greater mass of an armoured cruiser would be necessary for the safety of both ships with the sea conditions common in the South Atlantic, and escort Canopus and the armoured cruiser back to the Falklands. You cannot possibly allow a disabled battleship being towed by an armoured cruiser steamed back to the Falklands without an escort with the German squadron operating in the area. Imagine damage, sir, that the press would do to current administration, including suspicion as the First Sea Lord, if I'd allowed the Germans to sink a battleship. Even an old one, and an armoured cruiser with great loss of life. However, any meaningful escort that I could detach from a squadron would render any attempt by the remainder to bring the Germans to action to be a little better than murder. So I chose not to expend my squadron for no gain, and much hurt to both the reputation of the Navy and the government. And took up, no sir, we definitely did not retreat to Falklands. We advanced our ships, were sailing, our sailings were sailing right way round, thus advancing, a strong blocking position where we shall have the opportunity to bring air action under favourable circumstances. Enough hints of the danger and potential damage to the political personage that your actions saved from your eye may give you a low % chance of avoiding court-martial, if the more naval personages involved don't point out the BS. This is why you need officers the officers that need not just command skill but political skill, so they can phrase it properly so they can avoid that. Our Scarlet, hello, or Og Sarlet, I think. From what I was told in high school history classes, the Battle of Crenel was summarised by my teacher as a bunch of bad luck, bad decisions made by the Admiralty, and a formation of ships pulled together to face off against a formation of ships that, for the most part, outclassed them entirely, and Canopus not being there, somewhat due to a certain chief engineer, basically sealed their fate. Don't get me wrong, she was a good teacher, but she seemingly only gave a brief overview with a minimal detail, so thank you, Mr. Clark, for clearing a lot of details up for me with this video. Much appreciated. Cheers from Australia. Thank you. Colonel Overkill. To be honest, and she does sound like a good teacher, I would say, that she actually covered the Battle of Coronel is a good sign to me. To be honest, saying war is bad and water is a tad damp are so blinding obvious it shouldn't need to be restated. However, we live in a time of modern enlightenment where we question if the Earth really is round. It is. If water is damp, trust me it is. And if it's a good idea to drink laundry soap, trust me it's not. It tastes foul and really doesn't do your liver any good. All of which could be answered by a particularly severely brain-damaged brick. It's not particularly polite. If someone isn't literate enough to believe war is great or any of the above are irrefutable, then saying war equals bad is a pointless waste of breath. I would agree with you to an extent. Tell Lucas, I don't see good solutions for Craddock either, especially without the benefit of hindsight. With hindsight, even actions like gently bump good home into Monmouth in Standing Harbour can be considered good. However, I see two small opportunities that don't require hindsight. The Otranto problem. Even if Craddock was expecting from just Leipzig, Otranto wasn't really helping to catch her while staying in the squadron. If I remember correctly, the day before Coronel, Otranto was sent away to Puerto Montt for reconnaissance. Well, she could continue checking bays and blights on the Chilean coast, where she was unlikely to meet Leipzig. After all, that's what merchant crews are for, to free up your proper warships from such mundane tasks. 2. During the battle itself, I'm not sure about Craddock's decision to close range after firing started. The Germans had a rather brief period of lighting advantage, about 45 minutes if I recall correctly, which is not a lot of time if you're firing at long range. But by closing range, Craddock helped them to exploit it fully. Staying at long range, or at least slowing down the closing range rate, could have allowed Good Hope and Monmouth to survive till darkness without turning into well-illuminated torches and survive the battle. And even the Germans could fire on them and find them dark. For Good Hope and Monmouth, that they're not entirely crippled, short-range Celtic melee in the dark looks like the best fighting chance they could hope for. I would agree on that one to an extent. Adam Blaine, hello. Well, if I'd been Craddock's position, then I would have responded to Churchill that he had just ordered me to fall on my sword and get my men killed to boot. I, of course, would never have made it to Craddock's rank. Sounds like you're far too open, honest speaking. Anna Blaine, not strictly related to Coronel, but before World War I, the Triple Alliance had a plan for the Austro-Hungarian Navy and the Italian Navy to combine and cut the Mediterranean in half in the event of a war. Or if that was not feasible, then to make the trade routes through untenable. Do you think that had Italy joined the Central Powers of World War I, that such a plan could have been pulled off? If so, what kind of knock-on effects would that have had on the war? It could have been pulled off short term. Long term, the Royal Navy building program goes ahead dramatically. Because all those ships which are paused and not built, those capital ships which they don't build, they would build. Why do I say this? Because what they'd end up doing would be maintaining a fleet large enough to be the Grand Fleet. The French fleet would be knocked out by any such scenario. The British would probably contain them with remnants of the French fleet and support people like Gibraltar. And the fact that getting out of Gibraltar could be made very, very difficult by submarines and torpedo boats. And destroyers. And minefields. And pretty much everything they could. But at a certain point, the British would want to go back in. So it would be a case of build a fleet, and then it would be you would need to be taking in a 2-to-1, if not 3-to-1 advantage in capital ships while maintaining the Grand Fleet. So whatever capital ships the French have left, and whatever capital ships the British can maintain and can get, would be called upon. And it would literally be a battle royale for the Mediterranean. Probably would also have to involve on their part an invasion of Malta, which could be interesting. But to tie it back to the video, if Italy had joined, would von Spee have tried to make the run to Italy and Somalia? Or not, for the same reasons he didn't flee to Tanzania? Probably not, because you can't really get home from there, but because you can't go through the Suez Canal. But there is then an increased chance of getting in the Mediterranean. Under those scenarios, it's going to sound strange, but under those scenarios, if they have joined, and if there is, it depends what happens at Alexandria and depends what happens at Gibraltar. I have no doubt the British retain control of Gibraltar because of the sheer amount of force which we sent there to maintain control of it. But Alexandria is a long way away. Alexandria is a long way away. And the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians together might make a push on the Suez Canal. They might. And that then changes things. But whether they make a push on the Suez Canal quick enough for von Spee to hear about it and be able to go and attack from the other direction is a different matter. And whether when they push on it, if it's not bombed to pieces or mined up the wazoo, is an entirely different matter as well. Street Racer, lol, a political ad ran at the beginning of this, and it claimed that the King of Prussia isn't a real king. Pretty sure he was. King of Prussia isn't a real king? He was, but then he became the German Emperor. We'll leave that to one side. I don't think he is today. Dave Brennan, an interesting lecture to look like. This battle and its follow-up has always interested me since I've learned of reading naval history books beginning in the 70s. It was a good battle. 116.30 from Paul Chicago. That statement about British losses is not correct. Constitution took a pair of sloops in 1815. Not a very fair fight, but it was a loss, and the RN suffered several squadron defeats on the Great Lakes in the War of 1812. I think it was based on number of people killed, but there is always quite a possible chance that I flooded the livery and mucked up the qualifier. Paul Chicago, that's not just you. I think Track may have made a similar statement, and I've read elsewhere. I've been looking into this, and actually it's a fairly common point that made about a list I gave off of the previous disastrous defeats. I think it's due to the totality of the losses. Honestly, I think it's due to the number of people killed, and it's the totality of losses. It's basically going back to number of people killed. So yes, they've suffered defeats, but they haven't been defeats on this scale. So to go back for something of an equivalent scale, this is the most significant since then. I think. Kilgar and Fairnesson, hello. If I were Craddock, I might have taken Canopus instead of Otranto. I mean, if both are very slow, and both will slow my force down sooner, then at least I have something armoured with 12-inch guns. But from Chicago, if I'm Craddock, I diagonally fighting von Spey. The man had no other options left to him. Churchill flat out murdered Craddock and the men of Craddock's squadron. Craddock did his duty and slowed von Spey. That's true. We nice to have the 12-inch guns. Not a wolf. Yeah, this battle annoys me too. I love the emphasis on the politics that led up to the battle. As many videos I'd expect that you can easily access, just talk about the battle. About Admiral Craddock is that he's not an idiot. It's great to know how a video to point out, and say this guy really knows stuff and will give you a full picture. I personally, maybe naively, would have said I need X-forces like those you mentioned, and said I'm all for king and country, but my men are useless if dead. I would have tried working my way up the chain through both through official and unofficial channels, all while holding my cards tight and taking a more defensive posture. But frankly, I'm a guy who's willing to take and has taken a lot of heat and downright punishment when it comes to protecting his enemy. If it meant being deemed a disgrace and never getting command again, so be it. At least my conscience will be clear. I can understand that, but I think there's also a point in Craddock's mind that he's worried about who else might be sent if he's not sent. I think that comes through. There was an interesting comment, I think, from Paul Chicago about Craddock being the second best admiral in the Royal Navy after Jellicoe. I'm not going to quite agree with that, because there is Hood going around at this point, and Hood is a very, very smart admiral. And there are a few others as well who are very good. But at this sort of rank, there's a sort of, how do I put this? There are some very good, what I would call, conservative admirals. They will not put a foot wrong, but they won't do the daring do necessary for put right. And then there are some stars. And the stars, they all have their individual strengths and weaknesses. Craddock is one of the stars. Is he as high a star as Jellicoe? No. But is he second? No. But he's definitely in the top 10, I would say. Paul Bestwick, if you didn't present as you do, we would be in a denied fluffy research assistant, random appearances, and that would make us sad. I know. I like the fluffy research assistants and random appearances. Michael Cooch. I've been waiting for this one and didn't disappoint. Thank you. Thanks for another very enjoyable and informative video. A useful primary source on Canopus is My War at Sea 1914-16 by Heathcote Grant. Canopus Captain is currently available as a Kindle book and as of today is free download. It is, and it's worth reading, definitely. I'm not quite sure about all of it though, because there's a little bit, I think there is a little bit of, how do I put it, historiography going on there. Deeks25, I always felt sorry for Craddock. His conduct during this time shows he was capable and understood his position. He was up against one of the best German formations, commanded by one of Germany's best admirals. He knew he had insufficient force, he knew he needed defence.
He knew Canopus was as much a hindrance as useful. He knew he would need Otranto if he got an advantageous engagement. He knew what von Spey was trying to set up, i.e. set British ships up against the setting sun, and he knew once the battle started he needed to close in an effective 6-inch gun range. He also admired his honour. He refused to simply abandon Otranto, even though a cold, heartless argument could be said that that was the correct action, and he fought the enemy to the best of his ability without hesitation, even though he probably knew there was no chance of victory and did his best to make it as costly a victory as possible. And this is before knowing the guy had been accused of the guy had been accused of refusing to fight. About as horrific an accusation a Royal Navy officer could receive. Churchill was many things. A good commander, he absolutely was not. And his arrogance cost the Royal Navy several different ships, a lot of men, and a capable admiral. And I feel for Craddock because of all that. True. Deeks25. On the whole presentation style, it's your channel, Dr. Clark. You present your content how you choose. And if others think they know better, then they frankly should go and do better. I enjoy your presentation style because you come across with passion and enthusiasm. Thank you, Deeks. Greg Murray, if you could buy Churchill for what he is worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth, he would be a pricey, but you would make a handsome profit. Probably true. There are a few things left out about Craddock which I found a little surprising, and I have a disagreement with you. I knew this one was coming somewhere. Craddock had been a lieutenant on a royal yacht. He was good friends with or known by a lot of British royals, including a certain Germanic cousin. You don't put idiots there, and you also don't put idiots as flag captains. No, I never said he was an idiot, though. Craddock was a sailor. He literally wrote a book on the lower deck, Wrinkles in Seamanship. He participated in early air experiments flying off planes from ships. Went to the Naval War College at Portsmouth. Did some amazing sailing to rescue some people after a liner ran aground. He was no Jellicoe, but no one was. That's the kind of point. Jellicoe was once a generation kind of person. Primary disagreement with you is that I'm of the opinion Craddock was literally the second best admiral the RN had. Said, not quite sure about that. The men associated with the Harwich Force weren't admiral rank yet. There is one going around called Hood, who was running the Channel, and he's very, very good. Unfortunately, he's not given command of the battlecruisers, it's given to Beatty. He wrote back to the Admiral asking for help, and they sent him off to die with very explicit orders. I would agree that he did ask for more. He did ask for help, and he didn't get it. He asked for the resources he needed to do the job, and he didn't get it. Paul from Chicago. Another point Another point that I want to bring up was the Minotaurs and Warriors. Any one of these ships would have been a better match for von Spey's squadron, particularly given the sea state and the fact that so many British 6-inch guns simply couldn't bear. The higher freeboard and larger armoured cruisers could have negated the problem. Jellicoe was demanding to keep the battlecruisers. I get why. Our leadership could have simply stripped all the Minotaurs and Warriors and sent them south. It's simply perplexing. A lot of the Minotaurs and Warriors have been in the Mediterranean to deal with the how do I put this? The issues of the Goeben. Churchill was an awful First Lord of the Admiralty, a cavalry officer playing at boats. As I've said before, the trouble with Churchill is also look at who he's surrounded by. He was a young minister, and he was young at that time. He matures and learns better, but yeah, he's not in the strength at this point as he could be later. Edit, as a thought experiment, think about what the start of World War I would look like with an actual competent First Lord. Imagine Anson and Dundas or St Vincent, as opposed to Churchill. Our competent First Lord would have walked into the Prime Minister's office, brushed every military fool down, and walked out with a British and a naval grand strategy before the war started, as opposed to the slog that lost Great Britain her empire and the status of prime great power. Okay. See, there's a small problem with that. When everyone turns around and says World War I cost Britain her empire, not really. In fact, the empire gets to the biggest it's ever been in the 1920s and 30s. And I would say status as great power, potentially, but that's been in trouble for a while. There have been people jumping around, budging jumping at her. And it's basically picking who else is going to share the title with you. Which the British sort of do. But I do agree still that someone else was needed to go in and talk about the strategy, because the strategy chosen was terrible. Iskandar Tarab, hello. Wow, this is the most emphatic I've seen, Dr. Clark, yet over subject. Excellent discussion topic. I didn't realise that some of the ships involved didn't even have accident-line turrets and had become so common after Dreadnought. Nope. Looking forward to Liveness, could you cover the following point on live, please? You stated Monmouth couldn't play an effective role, presumably because she couldn't get an effective range. What range should she have close to? Similarly, did the range play a factor in the comparatively poor results of German light cruiser gunnery versus Glasgow? Given the sea state, what were the effective gun ranges of various weapons employed? Effective gun ranges for, well, once you're down to sort of 6-inch guns and below, you are probably looking at less than... Well, that's an interesting question. Theoretical maximum range with a light charge is 14,600 yards, 15,800 yards with a heavy charge. Theoretical. Effective firing range in this weather, you're probably talking about half that. So you're probably talking somewhere in the region of 7,000 to 8,000 yards. Probably. For the 6-inch guns. And just start making it lesser for the smaller, the lighter guns. The German guns were theoretically more powerful. But, yeah. It doesn't really work. The German guns have the definite advantage in range and being able to do volley firepower and salvo firing. Orion Taylor, this pair of Iron cruisers are easily in my top 10 wrecks. I hope two will be found and surveyed. They're so largely forgotten and those men deserve better. True. Glenn McGivey, I think in a situation I might have split my squadron. Had my faster ships aimed to break south, my slower to the north. The goal is to track the German flotilla so heavy units in the fleet can set sail to hunt the threat. Without heavier assets, I prefer to avoiding any engagement without some terrain or a buffer of advantage at my benefit. Rather than offering up my entire squadron of ships to the enemy, I force them to decide where to set their own assets. I know I can find reinforcements. The Germans now know they are alone and must concentrate their power. If I ignore my slow ships, word is out. If I ignore my fast ships, I will be gathering. If they ignore my slow ships, word is out. If they ignore my fast ships, I'll be gathering with ships in the Falklands and other hunting units as soon as possible. This is certainly not a winning manoeuvre, but it will make more confidence that the Germans shall lose. After all, I can see I am outgunned and outmatched, and I'm not ignorant enough to send my sailors to the death without benefit for the sake of a pair of guns that might match 12 of my foes. I see everyone. How could the British Empire have won this? Send Minotaur, Defence, and Shannon down there? I would have won it. Send any of the battle cruisers. Lafayette Abril. I think the least kind thing I can say about Kit Craddock is that he was too brave for his own good. Coronel was a no-win situation for him. Either he fought and what happened to him happens, or he turns tail and runs, and almost certainly suffers the same fate as Trowbridge. I.e. gets court-martialed and never sees ocean-going service again. For those that aren't aware, Trowbridge got exonerated in saying court-martial and yet never served at sea again afterwards. You can win but still lose. Also, should be noted that Glasgow also had a first-class skipper in John Luca. Yes, did. Stephen Cross. Wasn't Sturdy one of the officers in Beresford camp when that row was going on, and that's why Fisher hated him, as he was a man who never ever forgave his enemies? To an extent. Craddock was interesting in that he managed to stride both camps. As I said, another thing to factor in was that neither Monmouth or Good Hope were fully worked up. Their crews were mostly fresh recruits or old reservists, and the ships themselves had been hauled out of reserve fleet before being sent out at sea. This is something which is a bigger thing today we worry about today than they did at that time. It was perfectly normal to have ships which were only activated yearly from reserve training for training, and they were considered just as much part of the fighting fleet and just as well trained. They would work them up quickly, they would get them working, and so I wouldn't really have anything said about the ship's crews or their quality. They're good. I recall reading that Canopus' chief engineer had some sort of mental breakdown, was lying to his captain about what the ship could do in aftermath of the battle when she was at sea, trying to reach the region she was doing around 17 knots instead of the 8 to 10 her engineer said she could do. There is certainly something going on there. It wasn't ever 17 knots, though. John Garabov. If the IJN had gone after von Spain instead of first gobbling up German territories, the East Asia Squadron would have been quickly annihilated. They were hunting them. This is the point that's often have gone. They, along with the Royal Australian Navy, he just managed to get away. This was von Spain's quality. He got away. Always missing them by only a few hours, there were ships left in Tsingtao as well. It wasn't just Japanese empire building. Neutralising that threat was what they were being asked by Britain to do. And now Andrew Cox. Once the action is joined, Craddock is up the creek without the Powerball. I think I would have detached Otranto long before, if only because in any kind of action she is useless. I read that Craddock kept her with the force, so he was worried that if she was alone she wouldn't have stood a chance. Otherwise, I really can't see what other option Craddock had that would have given him a chance. Maybe try and delay smoke or use the smoke to disrupt spotting during the sunset period to prevent Spey using his range advantage, and then try and disengage during the night. This would have saved the crew, but may have ended up with Sturdy court-martialed. Probably Craddock court-martialed Sturdy. He's got allies. Remember, he goes back, he wins, and he gets battle cruisers. Well, battleship squadron of battleships in the Grand Fleet. Yeah. Ed Stevens, if I were Craddock, have a radio malfunction, pull back to Port Stanley to fix it and request reinforcements. Maybe leave the 2 faster ships out to report movement and the slower ships as guard ships or setting a trap. If that results in a court-martial, then make sure Churchill and Admiralty feel like co-defendants, justifying how it was possible to survive, let alone win against a superior force. Sensible. Definitely sensible. But honestly, not an option which an officer of that period is probably going to do, because they consider it dishonourable. As sensible as it might be. Right then, I did promise at the end I would chat fewer things. One, I love the comments. I love all the comments that keep coming in. It's really interesting to read. And this was a really cool one to get a load of comments on. Secondly, I'm starting to get messages from various groups putting on academic conferences. I am happy to take part. As I said, I often send in submissions to conferences and I love to take part in them. I don't even mind being asked to maybe put together a panel. There are people I can talk to. However, if you send a generic email and just include me on the email list, and I don't respond because I'm busy, and it's a generic email that's being sent to everyone, sending an email which is then taking my lack of response as something kind of personal affront, when I've never worked with you before, don't know you from Adam, and you've just sent out a generic email, is a little bit rude. It's not really what we want to do. Now, if you want someone who's truly famous, go and ask one of the big professors in the field. They are really superstars. I'm not a superstar. I'm just loud. It's my both advantage and curse. And sarcastic. Which is definitely an advantage and a curse. If you've decided me attending your conference is something which is really important to the success of your conference, then take it from someone who has organised his fair share of conferences in the past. Personalised email. Say, hello, Dr. Clark. If it's an academic conference and you're asking in academic style, then use the academic title. That's the whole purpose of it. And that's the world where I can be doctor. It's in academic circles. I've got the PhD. It was 100,000+ words of writing and nearly 4 years of my life. I did the work. I got the title. I also got the stress and the imposter syndrome that comes with it. We all inherit those. It's just part of the castle. So, thank you. And thank you for people who are writing to me. If I can do, I'm always happy to be part of conferences. I love them. I love taking part in conferences. I love having chatted with people in one-to-one and in person and being in groups. And yeah, if I have the funds, I'm happy to come. If you're offering to pay for me to come to a conference, that's even more fun. But yeah, I realise that I'm
couple of academic levels below that level. So thank you for the nice emails. Thank you for the people who send me emails, etc. Even if I'm on the group ones, I don't mind. But just for future reference, if you send a group email and you'll treat me as impersonal, and I don't respond because I'm busy and because frankly perhaps I'm just busy when that conference is due, so I'm just not going to flood your email with a ton of responses. A response saying no, no, no seems pointless. It doesn't. And sending a next email which is basically, why haven't you responded, why aren't you coming, are you too big for us, or anything like this now, is a bit rude. Okay, thank you very much for all your support. Thank you very much everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and take care.